Hi, and welcome to India Design Week. Today, I'm going to talk about carbon conscious design and the impact of UX practices on energy efficiency and carbon footprint. Carbon footprint actually is a pretty dense subject matter to unpack because it has so many different verticals and categories. So, for the purpose of this talk, I wanted to talk about something specific, which is electricity. Actually, I wanted to discuss something even more specific, which is internet's electricity footprint. Now, when we think about that, there are two different sides to it. One of them is intrinsic, which is the footprint of the technology itself, and the other one is extrinsic, which is more about people's behavior when they're using technology. Let's talk about the intrinsic part first. Over the past 10 years or so, we have seen about 12x growth in global internet traffic. Now, remember this tiny piece from 4 slides ago? This represents about 416 terawatt hours of internet's energy consumption per year. Now, you might be thinking, this is a random number. What does it even mean? To put things into perspective, internet as a country would be 11th in the list of countries by electricity consumption. This actually is more than UK or France, and it will only continue to grow. Now, something that we have done really well over the past decade or so is being able to accommodate that increased internet traffic into our data centers while keeping the energy use flat. This has been possible because of improvements in IT hardware as well as use of hyperscale data centers. Also, big tech's effort to power data centers with renewable energy has been a welcome move because obviously it is helping to reduce the carbon footprint. But something has changed. We have starting to see that in the past couple of years or so, the data centers efficiency gains have started stalling. We measure this using a number called PUE, which stands for power usage effectiveness. And ideally, it should go down to one, which is the ideal ratio. But we are now seeing that the progress has been, slower and slower when compared year over year. As if this wasn't already enough, we were hit by a pandemic in 2020. We were all impacted by it in one way or the other. But as a result of that, we were pushed into this remote first, internet first world, and we saw a 40% increase in global internet traffic just between Feb and April. So, what does it tell? It is becoming increasingly likely that the efficiency gains of current technologies may be unable to keep pace with this growing data demand. Yeah, when we think about carbon emissions, our efforts have to be a lot more aggressive. So when I think about this narrative, there are different stakeholders in it. There are policymakers, there are think tanks, and scientists, and engineers, and all these folks are, addressing the problem in their own way. Now, I just keep wondering, what can design practitioners do to sort of solve this problem? In order to do that, we need to understand the problem first. So, in today's world, when people are using apps and services, they always expect certain things out of it. For example, they want their app or service to be extremely personal, they want a lot of variety in it, they want it to be instantly accessible from anywhere. They need to have a high quality content which has, a lot of shareable components to it, or they also want to have some kind of continuous access to it. Basically Netflix, which is a service you can just use anywhere at any time of the day from any device, and that's why it happens to be one of the most successful products of our decade. It's very evident that the customer needs won't change, so the design has to adapt. Now, the question is, how do we do that? Something that has also happened over the past decade or so is increase in the page sizes of these web apps. This has been because of richer UI assets such as animation, imagery, graphics, and video. Now, when we use all of those elements, there's definitely a price tag. And the good part is you can sort of calculate that using this really cool tool that I found called Website Carbon Calculator, where you just go in and you punch in your URL, and it will provide you some data around how much of carbon dioxide is being produced, whether or not they're using green host. So it's a really cool way of showing how eco-friendly or sustainable your website is. So some folks at Pinterest did some work in terms of performance improvements. So their engineering team, improved the performance by using React, which is a more modern web framework. They also decided to apply design system to their entire platform, which make things a lot more consistent. They started using techniques like lazy loading. So this is a very good example of sustainable software engineering, which kind of aligns with the goal of sustainable interaction design. If you go to Apple's dev website, they do have some energy efficiency guides for iOS apps, and it ties well with the user experience. So designers can sort of use these as guiding lenses when they're designing for iOS apps. Android also has something pretty similar where they do encourage you to optimize for battery life and use these as lenses to design for Android's energy efficiency. Something that has been pretty popular over the last couple of years is the use of dark mode, and it's actually good because dark mode tends to use lesser resources when being used on OLED or AMOLED screens, which happens to be in majority of devices today. So it's a welcome move, and I hope that we see more and more apps providing an option to switch to dark mode. Honestly, the key idea here is to just think beyond neumorphism and those dribble shots, thinking about sustainable interaction design, thinking about guidelines and principles which we can use to design for apps and services. Now, the other side of the story is extrinsic, which is thinking more about people's behavior when they're using these technologies. So, doing my research, I came across this really cool framework which addresses people's behavior on three different levels. So, the first level is thinking about the intention, and this is where designers can think about providing some kind of information or feedback so that we can guide them towards the change. The other layer is habits, where we can use some interventions like eco stare or eco nudge to help them maintain the change. And the last layer is taking control. So this is where designer would put themselves in the driver's seat and come up with clever designs, so that they can ensure the change is permanent, because the product or app itself is eco-friendly or sustainable. So let's look at some of the examples. In terms of eco feedback or eco information, I came across this thing called power aware cable, and all it does is provides information when the electricity is being used. Now, this is a really cool way of making people aware that, hey, you know what, electricity is being used, and maybe if you want to turn it off, or do something with it, could be really helpful in terms of addressing the electricity use. In terms of EcoSpur or EcoStare, Nest thermostat is a really good example because it does tell users about their energy consumption patterns, and it has this little gamification piece where if you're using it on eco mode, it will just show this tiny leaf. So there's a little gamification element to it, and overall I think it's a really cool design which sort of nudges people towards more eco-friendly choices. Now the third piece is just coming up with clever design, and a really simple example of this would be the auto timer switch, where you can punch in a specific time for that switch and it will run for that amount of time. So it's really simple, clever design which ensures that electricity is being used in the most optimized way. Other example would be using the eco sensor TV, where if the TV senses that it's not being used for some time, it tends to shut itself off. So these are some of really good examples in terms of eco-friendly designs. So same framework actually can be extended to other interactions which affect people's behavior. An example of this would be Amazon, where if people want to buy something which is a little bit more eco-friendly, they can opt for products, and they came up with this idea of having climate pledge friendly badges, which provides more information about how the product has been sourced, whether it has certain kind of certifications and stuff like that. So it's all about providing more information so that people, if they do want to make a choice in terms of eco-friendly products, they can choose to do so. Similarly, they have stuff like no rush shipping or shipping in fewer boxes, which is another step in that direction of reducing the overall carbon footprint. I came across this really cool web search engine platform called Ecosia, where they use a part of the revenue which is generated from the search to donate to charity, and these charities in turn would plant trees. So this is a really cool example of mixing commerce with an entire environmental initiative, and piecing together in terms of a great service design. So I think honestly, as a part of the design community, we need to have these conversations around carbon consciousness. We need to think more about these principles and guidelines and frameworks which can help us achieve some of the sustainable interaction design which we should do in order to address carbon footprint. And I think it's a must have today rather than being a nice to have. So we should definitely think about carbon consciousness, have conversations around that. And this pretty much concludes my talk. You can find all of the resources to my research materials on my Twitter handle. Also, if you have any questions, just feel free to tweet at me and I'd be happy to reply. Thank you so much.